Hi and a huge welcome to Steve's Kitchen. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to make a dark treacle at home. Now some of you may not know what a dark treacle is. If maple syrup were the queen of syrups, then dark treacle is the king of syrups. How can I possibly say that? Well, if you're like me and you like the corner of the crumble or even the lasagna, if you'll take the fruit off of a fruit cake, you know, that dark little raisin that's poking out and make a hole there because of the caramel flavors, if you like the top of a creme brulee, you are going to love dark treacle. But imagine if you could just have the corner of the apple pie, but a lot of it, just a plate full of it. Well, you know it would be too rich. And that is where treacle, or dark treacle anyway, is that intense caramel flavor. And it's why it makes such a great baking accompaniment, because when you add it to something that you cook, it disperses the flavor of burnt caramel throughout. In some ways it's similar to a molasses, but because of the burnt sugar content in here, it is even more intense. Let me give it a little try and explain to you the flavors I get. It's super sticky stuff, so be careful with it. And you don't need very much to sample this. Here goes. That is one of the most intense caramel flavors, towards a sort of smokiness, even an aniseed, maybe a little bit of licorice, really intense. So you can imagine cooking with this is going to be fantastic. It was some surprise to me when I made the golden syrup in a previous episode that so many people were interested in making this dark treacle. So let's get on now and I'll show you how to make it. Luckily, it is not so complicated. We're just going to take 200 grams, that's 7.5 ounces of granulated sugar, pop it into a pot, and I'm going to add about 1/4 cup of water in with that as well. That's just to help the sugars to dissolve. It's already heating up. And we don't want to stir the sugars at all, although we're less worried about crystallization because we're taking these sugars up to a very high temperature indeed. Actually, towards 200 degrees Celsius or 400 Fahrenheit, beyond the point at where the sugars have burnt, we want to get a real dark, nutty color in these sugars. Now, I should say, be very careful when you're working with sugars at these sort of temperatures. It's twice as hot as boiling water, so don't let the children near it at all and be very cautious. Now at this point, all of the water has boiled off of the sugars and we're just starting to see, I don't know if you can see in there, some little blonde colors coming through, and the smell of the sugar will change a little bit. You'll start to get a real smell of caramel coming off the sugar now. Do be prepared for the smell of burnt sugar. I actually quite like it. It's a very rich smell, but it will fill the house. Now, soon after the caramelization stage, you're going to start to get towards the stage of burnt sugars, and the smells are going to get more intense, but we're going to keep cooking this on past the burnt sugar stage. Now, a candy thermometer would be very useful, but it is not essential. I tend to do this by eye, and you can see now in the corner there, if I were to put the thermometer in, we'd probably be getting up to about close to the 200 degrees Celsius. That's 400 Fahrenheit. And you can see now, if I give that a little shake through, the sugars are very liquid. And most of the sugars have started to go from a nutmeg brown to a really dark walnut brown. I want to cook this even further. The smell is going to be a little bit sour, but I want all of these sugars to be as dark as possible. Now, a few moments later, the sugars are starting to go a nice even black and the smell is even more intense. Another minute or so and I'm going to turn this heat off. Now you can see on the end of the thermometer just how dark those caramels are getting. At this point, I'm going to turn the heat off. Be very careful, this is super hot now. I'm going to let it cool a little bit, not much. If you were to let that completely cool down, it would be like black glass in the bottom of a pot, very difficult to work with. We have to add some more sugars and some more water. If we add any liquids into this, it's going to be quite volatile, so you have to be very careful and make sure any water we use is already boiling. Now the burnt sugars have cooled just a little bit in the pan, and I've got 500 grams of sugar, that's about 1.1 pounds, and I'm just going to pour that in over the top of the sugar. Then I've got water from a kettle here, and be very careful. I'm going to be adding in approximately a cup. As the water comes in contact with the hot sugars, it may fizz a little bit. I'm going to turn my heat back on. See how the black sugars have solidified? Next important process is we're just going to take 1/4 of a lemon. I'm going to squeeze the juice out of the lemon and gently drop it into my treacle. The reason we're putting the lemon in there is to stop any further caramelization of the new sugars. And there's a chemical reaction between the lemon acids and the sucrose in the sugar, and we're going to encourage the formation of some fructose as well. Now you can see the burnt sugars are still in the liquid there, so what we're going to do is let this simmer away. Now keep an eye on it, make sure it doesn't overboil, but we want it to simmer for about 35 to 40 minutes to allow the sugars that are in there to dissolve. Now a good example of a recipe that uses black treacle on my channel is the Yorkshire Parkin, which is just delicious. And a subscriber on the channel, Kaylo McKinnon, by the way, mentioned treacle scones, and I'm going to use the Homemade Dark Treacle to make those scones in an upcoming recipe, and they are absolutely gorgeous. Now I'm just checking the temperature there. It's been about 35 minutes. I'm getting about 119 degrees Celsius. So my sugar temperatures are starting to get to firm ball, and that's where a candy thermometer can be quite useful. Now the final stage, we have to just find the right balance. We've taken basically a hard cracked toffee and added it to what would be a soft or firm ball sugar. And we've got to make sure that when that cools down that it is like a very thick syrup and doesn't set hard. So what I want to do is just take a small piece from the pan on a wooden spoon and drop it onto a cold surface like the back of a pan lid, and let that cool for a minute or so. Now if when that's cool it is set firm, it's too hard. I've got this so it's actually quite like a nice thick syrup, and it is finding that right balance. If it sets firm, add about 5 to 10% of boiling water into it. It's about 1/4 cup at a time until you get the consistency when cooled feels right for a treacle. The flip side of that, if it's too watery, then just carry on simmering it for a bit longer. I'm happy with my dark treacle, so I've got a sterilized mason jar. I'm going to sieve this through just to get any bits of lemon that might be in there, and I'm just going to pour it into the mason jar. And of course, as that cools down, it's going to thicken up. Actually, when I made the golden syrup, 2 or 3 people said it looked too runny, but I can tell you when it cools down, just come in here. The golden syrup is just as you would expect it to be, lovely and thick, and so will the dark treacle. But at the moment it's super hot. I'm going to let this cool down, but join me in the next episode where we're going to be taking this treacle and making treacle scones, which are absolutely to die for. They are so delicious. As I said to you before, imagine that dark caramelized edge of any pie that you've enjoyed and then sprinkle it through the most delicious scone. See you then, take care.
And I hope you stay your goofy little self eternally. Oh, I'm weird like you, I know it's true. I'm in the clouds up there with you. You think you're flawed, but wouldn't you agree? You're perfect for me.